middle of the earth, in the land of Shire, lives a brave little hobbit whom we all admire. With his long wooden pipe, fuzzy woolly toes, he lives in a hobbit hole and everybody knows him. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, he's only 3 feet tall. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, the bravest little hobbit of them all. Hobbits are peace-loving folks, you know. They're never in a hurry and they take things slow. They don't like to travel away from home. They just like to eat and be left alone. But one day Bilbo was asked to go on a big adventure to the caves below, to help some dwarves get back their gold that was stolen by a dragon in the days of old. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, is only 3 feet tall. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, the bravest little hobbit of them all. Well, he fought with the goblins, he battled a troll, he riddled with Gollum, a magic ring he stole. He was chased by wolves, lost in the forest, escaped in a barrel from the Elf King's halls. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, the bravest little hobbit of them all. Back in his home in the land of Shire, that brave little hobbit whom we all admire, just sitting on a treasure of silver and gold, puffing on his pipe in his hobbit hole. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, he's only 3 feet tall. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, the bravest little hobbit of them all. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, he's only 3 feet tall.
Hello, friends. Speak, friend, and enter. You are all welcome here. It is good to see you again. And this is a Merry Corncrakes episode, a podcast. It is the affiliated podcast to the Corncrake magazine, which exists to promote good literature, whether it be classics like Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare, to current writers working independently. If you want to read good stories, go to thecorncrakemag.com right now, where you can read those fantastic stories. And today, my theme is a little bit different than usual. I recently came across the fact that there are several adaptations of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit prior to the Peter Jackson trilogies. These are ranging in who made them, in their quality, in their focus, in their attempts to stay close to the material, the source material, and they all raise different issues concerning the challenges of adapting an original story. But more than that, because we often talk about adaptation as a thing in itself, but actually they raise issues just of storytelling more generally. How do you tell a good story which may be inspired by something which is deep and complex and has many narrative threads? That could be something like The Lord of the Rings. It could also be like the Norse sagas, for example, or the Bible, the biblical narratives. It's quite hard to do these well in a film context. But the same could also be true of turning a film into a book. Take something like the Star Wars novels. There's a whole industry of people writing stories which tie in with the films. How does one go about that? Translation from one medium into another. It's a difficult thing to achieve, and I think that when we look at some of the adaptations of The Lord of the Rings, we'll see some of the issues that people come along. And it's somewhat easier to do that than with the Jackson films, because there's a bit of distance between us. The Jackson films have become so identified with The Lord of the Rings that for many of us, they were our first exposure to Tolkien's work. And many of the ways that they present Tolkien's work have become so definitive, not just in terms of the events that happen, but in terms of costume and scenery and the landscapes. When we think of Gondor, it's very easy to think of the Jackson Gondorians. When we think of the Shire, it's Frodo strolling amongst the Shire as it's presented in Jackson's films. There's a there's a kind of double reason for this. One is, as I've said, the kind of prominence of the films. The second is that their design was very much shaped by two artists in particular, Alan Lee and John Howe, who had both done a lot of Tolkien work prior to the films. So they were already steeped within that tradition and had kind of put their vision of Tolkien into the world already, but it became cemented through the films. Their vision is very inspired by the work of earlier artists who are still around today. But I would say things like Brian Froud's work on fairies had a profound effect upon the Lord of the Rings, and certainly Alan Lee was very close to Brian Froud. I think they're very dear friends. So it's good to have something which has distance to kind of see some of these challenges of adaptation, but also because it helps us to kind of consider the interpretation of The Lord of the Rings as a book and The Hobbit. It's very easy to think, oh, this is the very natural way to present it. But actually, if we could see different alternatives, whether they're good or bad, it kind of then opens up. Well, actually, how Jackson presented it isn't actually the only way to do the story, or indeed to present the Rohirrim, for example. We could think of different costumes, different physiognomies, different speech patterns and dialogue to give a different sense, to draw out a different aspect within the story. So I think that's quite an interesting thing to think about, especially as in about 20 years, The Lord of the Rings will be out of copyright. So by that point, we will have had time to imagine new ways of presenting the story. Before we get into it, let me say a word on the opening video that you saw. It comes from 1968. That's right, 1968. It is Spock from the original Star Trek, Leonard Nimoy, who is singing a song about Bilbo Baggins and the Hobbit. And while this is rather corny and a bit strange and weird, and probably would never have been picked up on, except the fact that it's Leonard Nimoy who's doing it, this very famous actor at the time, it ties into a growing trend during that period that in the 1960s, Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings really took off. It was a bit of a surprise. Most publishers didn't expect a book like this, which defied literary conventions, really appealing to people, but it hit a mass market. There was a real hunger for it. Now, in the music scene, a lot of bands were influenced by The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and you could see that very much in the kind of fantasy genre, which is taken on by groups like Led Zeppelin, Uriah Heep, Black Sabbath, Jethro Tull. It's all part of this kind of tapping into the power of nature, cosmological powers, mythologizing, and seeing kind of rock music as kind of a weapon in a mythological war, but also kind of a reaction to a kind of materialistic existence of the 60s, both in terms of capitalism and the somewhat in the hippie culture, and seeing, no, there's actually a deeper meaning to all this, and maybe if we go back to our ancient past or our long lost traditions and those older stories, we can kind of tap into something of that power, which our music is then communicating. And indeed, many of these bands have explicit references to Tolkien in their lyrics. Led Zeppelin are a prime example of this, the song Ramble On or The Battle Forevermore. So we can see that certainly in one strand of pop culture, Tolkien was having a legacy beyond his own work. But media or film was another area which started to have a bit of interest during this period. The very first video movie adaptation of any of Tolkien's works was actually The Hobbit in 1966 or 7, however you want to do it. And this is a rather strange little piece. It all connects to a man named Snyder, who had the rights to make a film of The Hobbit. But by this point, he was in a bit of a quandary because his contract essentially stated that he had to get a film out by the 30th of June based on The Hobbit, or he would lose the rights to it. And so he commissioned a fellow to an animator. This man was to make an ashcan film, really just a film that would help him to to keep the contract. And so what this animator did was put together something which, could you even call it animation? There's a lot of images which have zoom ins and some movement, but it's very loosely based on The Hobbit. It lasts 12 minutes in length. I'm going to show you a little bit of it so that you can get a flavor for what this thing is like, because I found it very different from what I was expecting. So if I bring that up, you can tell me if you can hear it when it plays.
This was Dale, the city of golden bells, in the time of Middle-earth, before men came to power and ruined magic forever. And this is the Arkenstone of old, the white heart of the mountain, the central treasure of all the vast treasures of this golden realm. Suddenly, it was all destroyed by the monster lizard Slag the Terrible. Slag, the agent of evil on Earth. And he dragged off the treasures of Dale, even the Arkenstone itself. Only 3 survived the flames, a watchman who slept when the dragon came creeping, Thorin Oakenshield, general of the now destroyed garrison of Dale, and Princess Mika Milovana, who sadly watched the crumbling ashes of her once golden realm. Gandalf, whispered General Oakenshield, only the great wizard Gandalf can help us now.
So you can already see that there's been a number of significant changes to the story just from this very beginning. Thorin is no longer a dwarf. He is a guard, a general in the city of Dale. And his city is attacked by not Smaug, but Slag, the dragon who is evil on Earth. Their home is destroyed. The Arkenstone, which is no longer a dwarven gem, but one that the city of Dale has been stolen, and they need help. And it's not just Thorin, but it is Mika, Princess Mika of Dale. This is we're getting a bit of a change here. We'll see how it progresses, but I think we're setting up much more of your classic sort of fairy story here, with a princess, a damsel in distress who needs to be rescued. This is not how the Hobbit is really framed at all.
Three ragged and weary survivors of Dale, the burned city of golden bells, came to the lonely tower of Gandalf the Grey.
I do like the idea that Gandalf had a tower which he lives on. Again, we're getting a strong sense of him being a wizard, which is something I will comment on later. I think the Jackson films make Gandalf less wizardy, if that makes any sense. He's not a strange and somewhat mysterious sorceress character. Think of somebody like Merlin, for example. Gandalf's much more that kind of older rock of stability that you can rely on, a leader first and foremost. I don't see him as strange and dangerous in the Jackson films in any meaningful sense to the protagonist. He's not someone who you want on your side, but you can't, is uncontrollable. He seems very much to fit in to that kind of command structure. Whereas here we've got him living in a tower. What's he up to in his tower? What kind of spells is he weaving? Who knows?
So it has come to pass, said the great wizard, that Dale has been destroyed by Slag, and that he nests on the treasure in the carved halls on the lonely mountain, just as it is written in the great book. Then it is clear that the time has come.
So this is an interesting thing, right? That it's been prophesied that Slag would destroy Dale. Now, I didn't see this when I didn't catch that when I first saw this, but it's striking because it suggests an element of fate or providence, which is clearly in Tolkien's works. It's hinted at in The Hobbit, and at the very end, Gandalf kind of rebukes Bilbo for thinking that his the success of the quest came down to luck. That actually, there's a hint that there's something more going on. And then in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf talks to Frodo about how Bilbo was meant to find the ring by a power other than the ring itself, or Sauron, or anyone else involved in the immediate situation. And throughout, there's language of intention in what happens in history. So here we've kind of got that bedded into this story, that there is something beyond which has predicted this to take place. There is a course of events which has been prophesied. This is at least cottoning on to that element of Tolkien's story, which I appreciate.
Time of the Hobbit. Far away from all the troubles of dragons and treasure lived a certain hobbit. Like all hobbits, he lived in a hole in the ground. It was a very comfortable hole, full of everything needed for a cozy, secure life. A far different sort of life than that of his great-great-great-great-grand hobbit. This settled and satisfied hobbit was named Bilbo Baggins, and he didn't know that his time had come. All at once they were there, eating his food, shouting for more, filling the air with terrifying words about dragons, fire, stolen gold, and death. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you are all talking about," cried Bilbo Baggins. "We are talking about you," said the wizard Gandalf. "You are the chosen dragon killer. You shall lead this group over the impassable barricade mountains, through the impenetrable Mirkwood forest, across the poisonous desolation of Slag, to Lonely Mountain itself, wherein the horrid creature lies. You must creep into the deepest great chamber of the old jewel mines of Dale and kill the fire-spitting dragon Slag." "A fascinating story," said the small hobbit. "And now, if you have all finished your breakfasts, it's been a great pleasure to meet you, and I wish you lots of luck and all speed." "But it is written in the prophecies," said General Torrin Oakenshield. "We cannot go without you." "Then don't go at all," shouted Bilbo. "Leave that old dragon be." The princess was furious and impatient with all this talk. "Mr. Baggins," she shouted, "that dragon has killed my father and all of my people. He has burned to ashes my golden land of Dale. Now he sits on our treasures and waits his time to strike other lands, maybe even here. If you are all afraid, then I shall go alone." Bilbo was shocked. He shouted at Gandalf, "But this is crazy. She's only a child. You can't let her face this journey, that dragon, alone." "Correct," the great wizard agreed. "I'm glad you see it at last, dear Bilbo. You can start first thing in the morning."
I think this is quite an interesting little passage, actually. Of course, this is, again, quite different from the book. We've got here Bilbo as a prophesied hero who's going to kill the dragon, and Thorin is appealing to this, saying, we can't be successful. The prophecy won't be fulfilled if you don't come. This doesn't motivate Bilbo in the slightest, and he's quite happy for them to go on themselves. It's when the Princess Mika shows courage and says she will go alone to defend her people, and appeals to the fact that the Shire might be attacked, which none of this is in the Hobbit. It's much more a theme in the Lord of the Rings. Bilbo is suddenly moved to demand her safety. It's quite an interesting kind of pull on the love of home, but also the desire to protect the damsel. Bilbo's sort of forced into action. And what I particularly appreciate about this is Gandalf's point here, that, and this is so true of politics in general today, that people will often say, "Oh, this needs to be done. There's this problem and this needs to be done to solve it." And it could be on any range of issues. But what they're really saying is, okay, I've got the solution here, but someone else must do it. I don't have the time or energy or effort or power or whatever to do it myself. And so it's a kind of throwing into the wind, saying, Please, somebody else do this for me. It's a kind of patronizing view, but also kind of hopeless, because why should anyone else take on your view if you yourself aren't willing to stand by it? Now, that's not always possible in life, right? I appreciate that. But so often it is the case on a range of issues that people will speak to them and then complain when others don't put them into place. Because Gandalf's kind of calling Bilbo out on this and saying, oh no, if you see the need for her to be protected, you need to go with her then. It's no one else's responsibility. You recognize that need, and you must fulfill it. This version of it is growing on me. Despite all of its changes, I think it's getting something that Tolkien would have appreciated, because that very sentiment is there in the Council of Elrond in The Lord of the Rings, right? There's that great moment where they're talking about whether they should try and throw the ring away or throw it into the sea, put it somewhere that could be hidden. And Gandalf says, no, not only would it have been found anyway, but it's our responsibility to deal with it so that the future generation doesn't have to. It's come to us in this time, and so we need to put an end to it once and for all, or at least try. So again, there's that sense of we have the responsibility here to fulfill this part of the quest. It's not somebody else's. It's not for us to kind of see the answer and put it off for someone else to deal with. Yeah, I'm giving this good marks so far.
And so they set out to follow the ancient map, leaving the comforts of Hobbiton behind and carrying barely enough food for the usual Hobbit between-meal snack.
I am enjoying this zany soundtrack. I am enjoying it a lot.
The conscripted dragon slayer and the 3 survivors of Dale struggled across the great barricades. Gandalf the Grey watched from his own distance. He knew well what terror waited along this craggy path. A crushed cabin burns a stolen lamb to feed groans, hungry brutes with skin as thick as bark. But people meat is their favorite food. The legends say that groans must be in their caves before sunrise, or they'll surely turn into dry trees rooted to the ground forever. But there was a long night ahead, and this puny lamb would serve only as an appetizer as the unsuspecting travelers approached.
So you can see that these Grolls are definitely the trolls from The Hobbit, right? I'm not quite sure why they changed the name. It might be a legal thing that because they've changed aspects of the story, they wanted to distance it, or for legal reasons, or just narrative reasons. But these are the trolls. I also enjoyed the kind of psychedelic flashing effect there. There's a surrealness to this, which it's not trying to stay faithful to the story in kind of beat by beat. It's doing its own thing, but it's also trying to have a big impact upon its viewer with the limited resources that it's got.
The smell of roasting lamb was too much for the starving hobbit, but the others, being bigger and even hungrier, knocked him spinning into a hollow log. In no time at all, the 3 were tied to the roasting spit. But the second groan was angry that the first had burned the lamb, and demanded that the new victim should be boiled instead of roasted. The first groan furiously knocked the spit from the flames and shouted that the second should be happy to have people flesh at all. Now the hobbit saw that he might save the others if he could just keep the brutish groans fighting among themselves. He was a good mimic, and he hoped the hollow log would amplify his small voice. The second groan's lips didn't move, but his voice seemed to shout, "No stupid ape like you can tell me how to eat my food." "Who are you calling stupid, you ugly knothead?" roared the first. Soon the dull-witted groans forgot all about their dinner and were busily trying to kill one another. They fought and cursed each other through the night till the first rays of the sun caught them by surprise. Bilbo had tricked them, and now they would be rooted to this spot forever. 2 less groans and 2 more gnarled dead trees.
So again, this is an interesting change. We'll comment on it at the end. But in The Hobbit, it is Gandalf who saves the day by tricking the trolls, by mimicking their voices and getting them to fight. Here, Gandalf's not part of the adventure. He's left now, and it is Bilbo who makes this, who does the imitation. Kind of interesting choice.
As they moved forward again across the great barricades, the survivors had a new opinion of their small hobbit dragon slayer. Perhaps he might prove useful after all, thought Torrin Oakenshield. Then, suddenly, Bilbo was gone. Down through a crevasse with a soundless scream as the others trudged on. Down past the chewed rock tunnels of the hateful grablins who kill and eat only for spite. Down to the roots of the mountain. Down to where there is none but Gollum. Unremembered years before, a weak and rejected creature found what Gandalf the Grey still seeks, the one ring of power. He had crept into the inky depths to hide it here, on this black isle where the Hobbit had now fallen, and he had cringed with his ring alone, in the dark so long, that he could speak only to his miserable self, Gollum. What horrid little nasty has come to steal our ring, my precious? We must squeeze it till it dies, yes? We durstn't let it take our dearest ring, Gollum.
This version of Gollum is quite horrifying. In some ways, much more horrifying if you ended up in a dark tunnel with this monstrosity, kind of part insect, part smiling joyfully Cheshire cat as it eats you. It almost strikes me as a kind of Dark Souls-esque, Bloodborne character that you might meet in a dark cave. Yeah, I love the vivid imagination here of Gollum. Again, departing from the source material somewhat, but thinking outside the box of what horrors could lurk in the deep places of the world.
Bilbo did have the ring. Magically, the one ring of power had found its true bearer. It was Bilbo Baggins the Hobbit. He felt the ring's power, that it might help him against the dragon Slag. Bilbo made a mighty leap on his broad hobbit feet, clear to the shore, and darted up the nearest tunnel as fast as he could go. Curse him and crush him, wailed Gollum. We must catch the tricksy thief before it reaches the outside. And the wretched thing waddled right past Bilbo, who of course didn't know the way out, but who guessed that Gollum did. And Gollum led him through the only tunnel unknown to the evil grablins and directly into the blessed sunlight. So Bilbo was able to rejoin his companions who had crossed the tops of the mountains, and they faced together the next obstacle on their long journey, Mirkwood Forest. Entering Mirkwood was like plunging into a sea of trees and being unable to come up for air. An eternal, endless forest whose mists were as poisonous as its vegetation. The four travelers were starved and exhausted, but they pushed on, compulsively determined to bring themselves to the most hideous danger of all. Lonely Mountain, wherein lay the killer dragon Slag. There he lay.
So before we hear the rest here, just a pointer. We've totally missed out the spiders and the elves, which are quite a big moment for Bilbo because he grows. It's the first time he actually rescues the dwarves, first from the spiders, then from the elvish prisons. It's a moment where he takes responsibility, and the power of the ring allows him to do that. Because Bilbo's already a hero, we don't need those things. He is a hero. He's got his ring. He's already saved them from the trolls, so we don't need that moment anymore, so we can just cut it. So in terms of storytelling, we've already seen his moment of growth. Therefore, these things, because we've got a compressed time to put them in, let's move straight forward to Slag. It makes a lot of sense from that point of view.
The vast red gold dragon, fast asleep, in this immense hall that once was the jewel mine of Dale. Ironically, Slag had dragged these same jewels from the treasury of the Golden City he destroyed back to the very place of their origin. As Bilbo looked out at this stupendous scene of both beauty and ugliness, his feelings too were a swirling mixture of exhilaration and horror. Then, out of this staggering panorama of gems, he suddenly saw only one. It was the Arkenstone of Dale. Now the tiny hobbit knew exactly how this lizard must die. It was the bravest thing he had ever done, certainly braver than anything the comfort-loving squire of Hobbiton ever would have imagined he could do. Perhaps it was only the power of the ring he wore. Perhaps it was his growing love for the Princess Mika. Or maybe it was only that he knew that someone had to do it. But he did it. He climbed the diamond vest of the slumbering dragon, and he stole the Arkenstone. Together with the others, he fashioned a powerful crossbow from old mining tools. And the Arkenstone, the white heart of Dale, was the arrowhead destined for the black heart of Slag. And so he did it, just as Gandalf knew he would. And the city of Golden Bells was built again, and Bilbo and Mika reigned there together. But finally they returned to that quiet, comfortable life in Hobbiton, until the next time that Gandalf the Grey would knock upon the round, green door.
So that is the very first adaptation of Tolkien's works into a video format, into animated format. I think you could see it's a very loose interpretation. It's almost as if the fellow has, he's read The Lord of the Rings, he's read The Hobbit, and he has to tell his son or daughter a bedtime story. And you jump from one thing to another, and without much trouble, Bilbo saves the day. And not only that, Bilbo wins the Princess Mika. That's how it feels to me. I do enjoy the artistic style for what it is. It's not a big blockbuster film. It's a small little thing which you could imagine showing your children before bed. Or maybe not, with the horrors of Gollum, or Gollum, as it is in this. But the artistic style shows a bit of creativity, especially with these strobe effects, and the some of the illustration is very captivating and can be quite striking. I thought if I could, like, for example, descending down here is quite engaging.
Down past the tube.
And all these grablins watching out at you like frogs. It's very evocative. So I appreciated that, and the music and sound design certainly draws into that. But it was an abomination, really, in terms of the first work to interpret Tolkien that was actually made. There were attempts before this, but they never got off the ground. So if this was your first encounter with The Hobbit, you would be totally misled as to the nature of the story. Yes, you would have the broadest points, but you wouldn't actually have The Hobbit in any meaningful sense from J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a fairy story created by somebody else using his characters, as far as I'm concerned, using just a couple of points in the plot. So it wasn't a strong start in terms of adaptation. The interesting thing with this is, because it was an Ashcan film and they just did it for contractual reasons, it only had one showing in New York. It was on the last date that the man could do it, and they actually paid people to come in off the street and watch the film for its entire 12 minutes. And then they just asked everybody to sign a document to say, we've seen a film of The Hobbit. After that, this was hidden away until it was discovered much more recently. So this wasn't a widely released thing. This was only seen by a small select audience, which is a bit of a shame. And it wasn't the first major interpretation of Tolkien's works in a media setting. For that, we need to move forward a few years, and we really come to 1977. So we're talking 10 years later, and we get our first major animated work. And again, it is The Hobbit, which is interesting. The children's book, which is seen as more adaptable to screen, perhaps because of its shorter length, but maybe its levity and lighter themes. less complicated. There's only one major narrative through The Hobbit, unless you're like Peter Jackson and want to weave in the appendices from The Lord of the Rings. And it is by Rankin and Bass. It's an interesting work. I have not watched the whole thing, and I felt that it had a somewhat of a cartoony feel compared to the one that I want to focus on today, which is the 1978 The Lord of the Rings, directed by Ralph Bakshi or Bakshi. The screenplay was by Conkle and Beagle, and this was quite a major attempt to do The Lord of the Rings. It wasn't just aimed at children. It wasn't something which was done. It wasn't done in a kind of haphazard, let's just churn this out. For Bakshi, he had been trying to get this done for several years in different formats. Originally, there was a live action version of The Lord of the Rings planned to be written by John Boorman, who would later go on to do Excalibur and did many important films during this period. But this was deemed impossible, and Bakshi actually really strongly reacted against Boorman's script, not least because Boorman, due to his interests in mythology and the kind of connections of the king and the land and the fertility rituals and cycles in mythology, which I think you can see very strongly in his Excalibur work, he wanted to kind of integrate this into The Lord of the Rings. So we have scenes where, to heal Eowyn, Aragorn basically mounts on top of her and starts kissing her passionately. This leads to a certain ritualized conjugal relationship going on where she is once again healed. This seems a far cry from Tolkien's work. It's an imposition into his work of a really Jesse Weston's theory of the Holy Grail and her studies and others' studies of the Druidic rites, which underpinned Arthurian and other myths in those academics' views. So Bakshi had to wait a long time, but he managed to get funding eventually to do an animated Lord of the Rings. This work that is today is actually the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers put together into one film. And we'll come to the challenges that poses, because it's a 2-hour film, so it's not super long. And one of the interesting things with it is he used a technique called rotoscoping. So that's where you film a live action performance with actors and props and so on. And then you take that footage and you use it to trace an animation. And then with that animation, you can add other aspects to it. So this was quite new technology in this period. It hadn't been used in the way that so fully as Bakshi would use it for this version of The Lord of the Rings. And it allowed him to really have bigger battles, because it's hard to animate hundreds of people. But if you're rotoscoping, you can trace those hundreds of people, and it speeds up that process. So it allowed him to pull off a kind of epic animated Lord of the Rings, which was quite important. But it was hybrid as well. So there are some aspects which are live action with a kind of filter on them, essentially. And this, to our eyes, especially now that we've lived many decades afterwards and we have CGI and all the special effects that can be done now, we can very easily see the difference between the live action and the rotoscope characters. I would imagine back in the past they would still be able to pick up on that difference, but it might have been lesser than it is today. Bakshi's story, as I've said, is integrating the first two books of The Lord of the Rings. And to do so, he has to go at an amazing pace. It is a very quick telling of the story. Not quite as quick as The Hobbit, as we just saw, but there's a lot of compression required, a lot of jumps in the story to hit the key beats. And it's quite important to note that although he makes changes, he does so in a spirit of trying to stay as close to the text, to be as pure in his telling of the story as possible. He really was quite committed to this, so much so that when he spoke to Tolkien's daughter Priscilla, Bakshi made a promise that he would not cut things willy-nilly, and he would not change aspects of the story to suit his own narrative needs. No, he wanted to, as in his words, it was about embracing what the genius had done. But to do that in 2 hours is a real challenge. And I think one of the things that's often the case in this work is that there's a lot of integration of Tolkien's dialogue, explicitly drawing on it. It's like taking a line here and a line there, and it's welding it together. What that does is two things. One, the conversation doesn't really have a natural flow. There's a lot of kind of illogical steps in the conversations. But secondly, it leaves a lot unexplained or not fully worked out. I want to play a specific scene from this, not only because of its importance in kind of illustrating this, but because it will help us to see other things that I'm going to mention as well as part of his Lord of the Rings. So if I can find it, I will play it in a moment. Yes, so let me bring... Oh, I've got... So let's put on... It's probably one of the most important scenes in the early part of the Fellowship of the Ring, where Gandalf and Frodo are talking about what the ring is, what its significance is, and what Frodo is going to need to do with the ring.
So do I. The enemy still lacks one thing to give him strength of knowledge, to break all resistance and cover all the lands in darkness. He lacks the one ring.
But maybe he doesn't know that it was found.
He knows, Frodo. Gollum left his cave to follow the ring himself, and the Dark Lord caught him in Mordor.
I love the way Frodo walks across that bridge. I want to see that again. Just watch Frodo at this moment. He's got such swagger.
Gollum left his cave to follow the ring himself, and the Dark Lord caught him in Mordor.
That Hobbit.
The Dark Lord knows what ring it was that Gollum found and how he lost it again. And he has heard of hobbits at last, and of the Shire. And he even has a name to think about. The name of Baggins.
Because of Gollum. Oh, Gandalf, what am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo didn't kill that vile creature when he had the chance.
Yes, it was pity. Pity and mercy. And now, Frodo, the decision lies with you.
So this is what I wanted to comment on here, and there's other examples that I'll mention. We hear the pity and mercy line, but we don't get any further explanation of what he means by that. In the book, it's quite important. Gandalf goes on to talk about how Bilbo's pity, in part because there was no need to strike, in part because he understood Gollum's plight, but also more broadly the fact that Gollum might be open to repentance, might have a role in the future of the ring. Gandalf kind of gives all these reasons to kind of explain Bilbo's pity and why it's important, why it may have been a good thing. Here we just move straight on, and it kind of is left hanging. If you didn't know the story, what would you make of that? It was pity and mercy, so now it turns to you. There's no kind of context here. There's no elucidation of what's being said here. So I think it. I think this is quite common. We'll see later on in this scene the emergence of Sam. We get no context for who Sam is. We're never told who Sam is, his relationship to Frodo, why he would be interested in this quest. He just seems to end up on the quest. Another example is when the Fellowship are at Amon Hen and they split apart. They just suddenly run into a group of orcs. There's no explanation that these orcs are from Saruman and they're trying to find Frodo and keep him to bring the whatever he has back to Saruman and kill all the others. There's no mention of any of that in this story, so we don't really get a sense of why these orcs are there and why they don't kill Merry and Pippin when they get the chance. It's kind of quite typical of this film.
What will you do with the One Ring?
Also, their facial expressions. When I first watched this, I had a few drinks and I couldn't stop laughing. Their expressions are just a bit wild sometimes. Certainly, Gandalf's eyes are ones to watch out for, and Frodo's facial expressions in this little scene are something to just chuckle at.
I'll give it to you, Gandalf. You're wise and powerful. Well, will you not?
No! Do not tempt me. I would wish to turn it to good, and it cannot be used so. Meaning to be kind, I would be...
What was that moment there?
I would wish to turn it to good, and it cannot be used so. Meaning to be kind, I would become as terrible as the Dark Lord himself. Do not tempt me. I shall have such need of...
I mean, what the thing is here, it's not just the reaction, right? It's that his reactions don't seem to be in any way corresponding to what Gandalf said in time or in when we would expect them all in emotion. Like, is this really the sort of emotion you would have with Gandalf saying he can't take the ring because he would use it for evil, or he would want to use it for good, but it would turn his good to evil? It would manipulate him. I just don't buy it.
Strength so soon.
Then I suppose I must keep the ring and guard it. And I ought to go away somewhere alone. They won't bother the Shire if the ring isn't here.
My dear Frodo.
Again, like, what is this? This is I feel like one would have had to have taken quite a few substances to to really appreciate this film's facial animations. They're just wonderful, in a kind of bizarre, absurd way.
I'm afraid you are right. You'll have to go and leave the name of Baggins behind you. That name is no longer safe. Your new traveling name shall be Mr. Underhill.
We're now about to see one of the most egregious things in all of cinema history.
What have you heard? And why did you listen?
Oh, Mr. Frodo, sir. Oh, don't let him hurt me, sir. Don't let him turn me into anything unnatural.
Well,
Answer him, Sam.
Well, sir, I heard a deal that I didn't rightly understand about an enemy and rings and about elves, sir. Oh, I would dearly love to see elves, Mr. Frodo.
and so you shall, Sam. So you shall. Indeed, you should go to the elves first, to Rivendell. Tell everyone you are moving away, perhaps to live in Buttlebury with those cousins of yours, Pippin and Merry. However you manage it, do it soon, by your birthday at the latest. I should be back by then. I must go south now to consult with the wizard Aroman, the head of my order. Be careful, Frodo.
Me go, sir. Me go and see the elves. Oh, my. Oh, hooray!
I mean, you just gotta laugh at some of that. I think let's focus on the positives first. I like this version of Gandalf. He is not as warm and cozy as we get in Jackson's Lord of the Rings. He's a wizard. He's an old man with a long beard, a proper long beard, and you can imagine him doing sorcery in a tower. He's on our side, but he's a little bit different. He's mysterious. He's strange. He belongs to another world than the ordinary. and he's a little bit scary. He's a little bit mischievous. Look at the way that he speaks to Sam, and then just for the heck of it, just does a little bit of what's he do here?
Then I must go south now.
He just scares him for no reason at all. It's just like, this is the Gandalf we've got here. He's mischievous. He's got a sense of humor, but also, you don't want to mess with him. I like that version of Gandalf. I also like, in this film, the characterization of Aragorn. In the Jackson film, he's automatically a hero just by physiognomy alone. We look at Viggo Mortensen and we think, yeah, this man is a hero. There is no question about his morality and his strength of character, and that he's going to lead from the front in battle. The version of Aragorn we get in this film is much rougher. When we first see him, yes, he's a solid, strong-looking man, but he doesn't necessarily look like a king. He looks more like a grizzled veteran, a ranger of the north, as it were. He doesn't look particularly heroic. And indeed, the first time we meet him, he kind of leaves this lingering threat that he could take the ring anytime he wants. So there's an element of threat there with this man, that he could just kill all the hobbits and take the ring. This is this kind of side of Aragorn, this rough and ready side, which also ends up with him insulting Barlam and Butter, there is a fat innkeeper who's ignorant. You just can't imagine Viggo Mortensen's version of doing that. He's a paragon of chivalry, whereas here he's a hard man first and foremost, and I think that's much more faithful to the books. So again, we've got a kind of stronger sense of the characters as not just heroic, but actually having certain character traits, which they'll eventually become heroic in various ways. What's terrible here is the facial animations and whatnot. You could give a pass. You could give a pass to, right? You can suspend your disbelief or your kind of reaction to that. What is egregious is something like how Sam is characterized. Samwise Gamgee, the real hero of the story for Tolkien, or at least he said in his letters, the bravest of the brave, a hard-working, simple fellow who knows what's good and right and will fight to the end for it. This thing is not Samwise Gamgee.
Me go, sir. Me go and see the elves. Oh my! Oh, hooray!
He's become a gibbering idiot who is there for comic relief. He's almost like a pantomime character, an ugly sister from Cinderella or something like that. And throughout, he is like this. I need to show you this. There's a whole compilation of Sam moments. I won't watch the whole thing, but it's just like he just needs it. It's just absolutely atrocious. Why Bakshi thought this was ever going to be appropriate in the Lord of the Rings, I do not know. Why he would do this to Sam, it's just kind of beggars belief, really. I know he wanted a bit of levity, but to treat Sam in this way is just utterly bamboozling, and he comes across as just a simpleton, to put it politely, an ugly simpleton. Let's see a bit more of this monstrosity.
I am called Strider.
Oh, I should say Aragorn's voice is by John Hurt, which is pretty cool.
Everyone knows me here.
Well, we don't.
Thank goodness for that rope the elves gave you. We'd never have gotten down that last cliff without it.
What do these things live on when they can't get Hobbit? Easy there, Bill, easy. Got you spying!
Sam? But you gave your word.
They already knew so much, Mr. Frodo. But we meant no wrong to you, Mr. Frodo. Don't you remember what Mr. Gandalf said? Take someone as you can trust, he said.
It doesn't seem that I can trust anyone.
How do we know he's from Gandalf? More like he's a play-acting spy working for them. But you won't send him off alone, surely? I gotta go home. They've dug up that chop row and thrown my poor old gaffer out in the street.
Do you wish to leave Frodo now and go home?
No.
I wish to enter Moria a second time.
And I don't wish to enter it even once.
Nor me. I still don't know as we can trust him, Mr. Frodo.
I said you have no choice, Sam.
It is hardly possible to separate you, even when he is summoned to a secret council and you are not.
A nice pickle we've landed ourselves in, Mr. Frodo.
Follow me, Sam. Stay close.
Whoa, Sam Ganji. Your legs are too short, so use your head.
I can't watch much more of more of this. Sam's character is really betrayed. You could never believe that this character, who's so dopey and silly and kind of just ridiculous, would be heroic and, you know, overcome Shelob, would rescue Frodo from Cirith would help carry him up Mount Doom. He's a gibbering fool who maybe there's a couple of moments of courage there, but it's done in such a ridiculous, laugh out loud way that I could never take Sam seriously. Other kind of a representation, but some of them are, you know, barring facial animations, there's, you know, generally speaking, it's okay. I feel for most of this film. What I will say though is a real positive, I think, is the presentation of the ring wraiths and the orcs, the villains, both in their design and in their their effects. Let me bring up the ring wraiths. And the reason why I say this is because, again, it's hard to think of these creatures outside of Peter Jackson's presentation, at least for me, having grown up with them. But actually, when we look at these, like, they didn't have to just be that way. And although Tolkien describes them, it's minimal description. There is room for interpretation, room for different interpretations and artistic styles. And I actually find the ring wraiths in this much more intimidating, with their glowing red eyes and the kind of loping way that they move, the way that the scenes change with their presence to kind of enter into a dark alternate dimension is really quite powerful. It's like they've warped reality around them. You've entered into their chilling nightmare now. Let's see if I can show you a little bit of this, because I think it's quite a lot better in some ways. I feel, because in the books, the main power of the ring wraiths, it's the emotional effect they have upon you, or the heroes, I should say. So it's their inspiration of fear and dread and despair, the loss of all hope, the loss of courage, the loss of the ability to fight back. That's how the ring wraiths defeat you. It's not through strength of arms or being great warriors or anything like that. They drain the life out of you. And so I feel like this version of it does it much better. Let's see if I can bring this up. Move this forward a little bit. I feel it's much stronger in its scary presentation. If we can see another version of, let's actually look at this version, because it's interesting, because Jackson definitely draws inspiration from this film. There's been a bit of controversy about whether he did or not, and he was a bit vague about it and said that he was trying to improve upon it at some points, and Bakshi kind of felt he wasn't being acknowledged properly. But this scene in particular is definitely an inspiration in the Fellowship of the Ring, done by Peter Jackson.
Of looking at my cousins all day.
I think we should get off the road. I don't want to be seen leaving the Shire.
But it might be Gandalf.
One problem with the scene is the horse disappears. They should never have a horse at this point. It's a problem throughout the film. Consistency often goes out the window. Kind of dissonant notes here are really quite irksome. You know, it's like, there's something unnatural. It needs resolve. Something out of place. It shambles along. I think this is quite effective as a presentation of the ring wraiths. Quite different. They're not, as I say, kind of ironclad warriors on horseback. They are very intimidating in their own disturbing, wretched way. That they are not, and I like how, because the limping nature of them, you know, these are beings who are less than human. They have lost their humanity. They are between two worlds. They're not going to be full of life and strength. They're actually these kind of slithering, snake-like creatures who want to devour you. I think, and like lure you in, and you just their very presence is an abomination to you. This is good work. Let's look at some of the orcs now, because I think they too are improved here. So we can look at maybe improved might be the wrong word, but they are. I think they are strong. They're a strong representation. What's a good? Let's try this. So many adverts these days on YouTube. So the Uruk-hai are on their way to attack Helm's Deep. Again, this similarity with the ring wraiths, with making their eyes like red points. So we've got a coherency with the nature of evil being the same. I think also there's a kind of hiddenness again to these creatures, so we don't see their full forms at any point. Often they are masked or helmeted in some way or another with all these strange shapes, which gives again this allure of mystery and menace that I don't find with the Uruk-hai orcs in the Lord of the Rings. They are brute objects, blunt objects. There is nothing magical or strange about them, which is somewhat surprising, because they should be. They're monsters, and they belong to a force of evil which is unnatural to us and distant to us, external to us in many cases. They are how to put it? They should be more. They should be. There should be a greater jump between us and them, in a sense. That the Jackson films, they're just other humanoids. essentially. Whereas here, they feel like they are very different species to us. Like something that couldn't be reasoned with. Something you couldn't really talk to. Now, it has been remarked by others that they look a lot like the Tusken Raiders from Star Wars, which came out the year before this. Possibly. I mean, I definitely was thinking that during the film. Ah, yes. Saruman's explosive device is no longer a a mine. It's like bolts of magic lightning that he sends. So yeah, I feel that there is something there's something good about this use of them. I'll see if I can find another moment because there's one in particular that quite struck me that had the orcs in it. A kind of strange moment actually, where yes, here we go. It's a very strange moment. So it's when the Rohirrim and the Uruk-hai who have Merry and Pippin are having a standoff in the film, the Jackson films. See, that's a slip of the tongue, isn't it? The film, no, the Jackson films. There's no standoff. They just have a fight immediately. The Uruk-hai are ambushed and massacred. In the books, there's much more of a standoff, a stalemate, a kind of a game over several days. And this is one of those moments where inexplicably a rider of Rohan just decides to charge into the Uruk-hai alone, and we'll see how that ends up. And it's at that point that the riders of Rohan decide, oh yes, we must go and help our fallen brother in attack. There's no logic to why that guy just charges in by himself, but it does start the whole battle. But you can see there that there's a kind of feralness to the orcs that, and they're just kind of almost, they do have a language and they do speak, but there's a certain blind, ungovernable rage and animalistic character to them, that they really do belong to a different species than us, and that beyond their physical form. I suppose what I'm saying is their physical form being these kind of almost void-like creatures with eyes and teeth conveys to us that within their very core they are different to us. Whereas the orcs in Lord of the Rings, yes, they're monstrous looking, but they just look like humans. They're just other humanoids, is my point. There's nothing deeper or more profoundly sinister about them that we get here. So I feel like these are really interesting choices and ways to present orcs and ring wraiths, which which challenges then how we get them and whether we should always think of them in the Jacksonian way, the Alan Lee, the John Howe way, when actually no, here's a different presentation. It might be more effective. That's it. Kind of opens our horizons as to certainly the Lord of the Rings as to what the best way to present these characters are, and how they should be presented, how we should think of them when we're thinking of the story, whether we can develop our own presentations of these characters. Take the Riders of Rohan there. They look different. Much more Conan the Barbarian sort of style to me, or something like that. Where they're kind of blonde haired, they've got their arms and legs showing, just a brown tunic, and certainly many of the characters have that sort of look where their legs and arms are showing, and they have that He-Man haircut. It's giving us a different flavor of using the form whilst keeping within the story of the Lord of the Rings. I think that's quite interesting for this work, but more broadly for other things. So when we think of Norse mythology, for example, to go there, are we bound by the forms we find in Tolkien or in other works? When we think of elves and dwarves being dark elves, right? Or the gods. Well, there isn't just one set of gods really in Norse mythology. There's the Aesir. Then there are others who are not part of the Aesir. The giants, the LotR, who again are not that distinct from the Aesir. It kind of raises questions about the relationships of all of these things and how we conceive of them, how we think of them, how we portray them, not just in terms of character, but in terms of form. And form and character are so closely intertwined in a lot of fantasy literature and mythology that it's impossible to not make certain choices. The choice to make Sam an ugly, small, gibbering idiot, his form and his essence are communicated to us quite clearly there, and it's a terrible one. By contrast, to make him a kind of stout figure that we find in Sean Astin, again tells us a lot about him without him even having to speak. It's an important part of storytelling and of life in general, because I'm a firm believer that often our appearances do reflect something of who we are, from the choice of whether to grow a beard and how we cut our hair to how rotund or thin someone might be. Yes, genetics are there too, but there's something more than just genetics in that. There are choices that have been made which reveal something about ourselves, about what we prioritize deep down, beyond the rational brain, beyond what we would say. So, and then this, of course, is where we get into questions of race swapping, for example. And I think that one of the examples that always comes to mind is Magic the Gathering had a card where Aragorn was black, and he wasn't just black; he looked like a sub-Saharan kind of warlord. I'll see if I can find it. I've spoken about this a little bit before. Here we go. So, yes, let me bring this to the screen. Here we are. Here is Aragorn from Magic the Gathering, the card game. And as you can see, with the way that he's got his hair and his skin color and so on, that this man is from somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. At least that would be his ethnic origin. And what I said about this was the problem you've got with this kind of arrangement is that his appearance doesn't match in our minds, in our subconsciousness, in the kind of the worlds that we inhabit, the sort of physiognomy that we would expect for a man who wears this outfit. And that's because this outfit is derived from Northwestern European pre-medieval history, where people in the Saxon and Norse ages and later into the medieval Gothic developed this kind of armor, would wear this kind of cloak. Why? Well, if you live in a green place, such as the forests of Sherwood Forest, where Robin Hood is meant to live, well, you would wear green, right? Because it helps you blend in, helps you hunt your prey or avoid the sheriff's men. This is not the sort of clothing that you would really need in Africa. It'd probably be too warm in many parts of Africa. The green probably doesn't help you match very well. And it's not a kind of armor or clothing that seems to have developed in sub-Saharan Africa. So, but beyond that kind of historical thing, the point that kind of that's added to this is that there are a set of literary and cultural ideals and values which are associated with that armor because they are in the stories told by those people. So something like Beowulf or Robin Hood is developed in a northwestern context and gets associated with this color of cloak and this armor, right? The stories that are told by sub-Saharan African societies become associated with the ways that they traditionally dressed and the weapons that they traditionally used, and so on. This gets broken by this relationship. And I think that's, that can sometimes be done in a good way. But in this case, it's not in a good way. It's not strong, and it's not done particularly effectively. And so I think that you get into a real problem when you just start to drop in someone of one race into a character which is associated with a set of clothing and values which belong to a society inspired by another race or another ethnicity. So I think this is a good example of the same sort of problem we get with Sam Gamgee in the animated one. We're getting with this sort of card here. If they really wanted to do this effectively, you could try and change the idea of Aragorn. Maybe the setting is moved to a northern part of a desert kingdom or a savanna kingdom, and he wears different clothing. I think that would be much more effective if you really wanted to do this in a way that feels authentic and not just tokenistic and it kind of undermining the character. So I think that's an important point in all of this sort of thing. Is there anything else to say? I think fundamentally the main problem with this animated version of the Lord of the Rings is that it's not consistent enough beyond its sometimes derpy art style, beyond its presentation of characters like Sam, and beyond its kind of rushed sense. There's moments where just things don't make sense, like that rider riding into the horseman. Just it has no logic to it. The final battle of Helm's Deep, there's just a series of things which happen which just make no sense to the audience. The horn of Helm Hammerhand is blown, and all the Uruk-hai run away. Then Theoden's knights charge out. They are then surrounded, but the music sounds triumphant, and you're thinking, what am I supposed to feel here? And why are all these people doing these things? There's no kind of A to B here. It's just things happening on screen. And I think that's a major issue with it. I think its great strength, beyond its attempt to get the characterization of certain individuals like Gandalf and Aragorn better, and indeed Frodo, who's much more active and heroic in this than he is in the Jackson films. He actually defies the Ringwraiths. He shakes his fist at them before he falls off his horse at the fords of Brunei. It has a certain whimsical and outlandish feel to it. The effects that we've seen, it's not trying to be photorealistic. It's not naturalistic. And I think it benefits from that because you feel like you're in an enchanted world. It gets the whimsicalness of it then as well. And so I think that's a strength of it as a presentation. Whether that's better than Jackson's, that's up for debate, but it certainly allows for a bigger magical scope than we do, and visual scope than with all the CGI Jackson is able to imagine, because his vision is very much like photorealistic. If you were in Middle Earth, what would it look like? Whereas this is kind of transporting you into a world where the enchanted matches into reality. So yeah, I think that's a major issue with this adaptation. I'll just mention a couple of other adaptations. We're not going to kind of go into them in detail because this was the one I really wanted to talk about tonight. There are in 1980. So I should say, Bakshi's film, these two, it made a profit, made $300 million at the box office, which is respectable, but a sequel was not made. The Return of the King was not made, and this was not because Bakshi didn't want to do it. The funding just wasn't there for it. There was no desire to fund it. But then, then the chaps who made the 1977 Hobbit, Rankin and Bass, they said, okay, well, we're going to make the Return of the King. So they didn't make the Fellowship of the Ring or the Two Towers, in part because they didn't believe audiences would sit through 3 films. I've often wondered as well, did they also think that the Bakshi version, which is the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers, it would be wrong to kind of repeat that people would already know that's out there. So, okay, we've got The Hobbit, we've got Bakshi's Fellowship and Two Towers, now we can just do the Return of the King. I think that's probably a factor too, particularly because Warner Brothers would end up distributing both, and Warner Brothers probably wouldn't want 2 versions of the same story. So they did the Return of the King, which by all accounts is not as good as The Hobbit, but it does have one particular song in it, which I will play very briefly, because I think it just got in my head when I. You need to suffer too, my friends. So many adverts.
Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, we don't want to go to war today. But the Lord of the Lashes says, nay, nay, nay. We're gonna march all day, all day, all day. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Where there's a whip, there's a way.
Yes, you get the idea. Where there's a whip, there's a way. Again, look at the orc design here. Very different from Bakshi's kind of spectral version. They're quite ugly looking, and somewhat I mean, this sort of song's kind of taken away their fear factor. But again, very different from the Jacksonian version. I would say if we look at them, they've almost got like beaks or whatnot. They're not just your simple humanoid, though they are more humanoid-like. So that's kind of interesting. Following on from that, we then get quite a departure from the animated stuff, and we move towards live action work. And this live action work, funnily enough, is produced in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, in the late 1985, there was a production of The Hobbit. It's almost like done as a stage play, almost, and filmed. It's and then there would be follow-ups. There was a Fellowship of the Ring done in the 1990s, and they are quite surreal, quite strange. It's like, well, I suppose this is true. These people, looking across at Tolkien's work from the Soviet Union, they see the forms of it and they get some of it, but they also don't get it. They don't get large parts of it. Maybe these deserve a special review stream in their own right, and I will hold judgment on them till then. I would say that particularly the Fellowship of the Ring one is just awful, and not like, it doesn't feel like you're watching the Lord of the Rings. It just feels like this bizarre, psychedelic, both in terms of what people have been taking to make it and in the experience. It's absurd and bizarre, and it just feels like they've taken the form and then put in their own sort of Russian avant-garde theatre. There is, however, a really lovely song in The Hobbit, and I wanted to play this because everybody thinks of the Misty Mountains song from The Hobbit, the Jacksonian Hobbit, as being the best song produced in film for these, but I actually think this is better.
Дорога вдаль и вдаль ведет,
Yes, that
под
is Bilbo.
солнцем или под луной, но голос сердца позовет, и возвращаешься домой. Молчишь, глядишь кругом, и на лугу увидишь ты знакомый с детства отчий дом, холмы, деревья и цветы, холмы, деревья и цветы.
What a lovely wee song that was. I think it was that was fairly good. It's but yes, I feel like that those Soviet works are going to need a full treatment of their own, not least because it's interesting that they're so drawn by the Lord of the Rings as a work to use, I suppose, the kind of communal life of the Shire, seemingly communal, is actually anarchic. Quasi-anarchic underneath a sovereign of sorts, or the King of Gondor, the King of Arnor, but they have really no kind of influence on it. Is that kind of close to a William Morris View from Nowhere, a Karl Marx communist society, and rising up against the evil overlords who will impose oppression from the outside, the imposition of slavery from Sauron and Saruman and so on. Or we think of Smaug stealing the homeland, stealing the gold from the workers, those who actually made the jewelry. Perhaps there's kind of tie-ins here that we could think of. And I would add as well, the deep love of home in these works probably appeals to certain strands of Soviet nationalism that modern liberal capitalism certainly doesn't have. So maybe these sorts of things appealed, and maybe just a growing desire to engage with the West but choosing what works to engage with in that period. Yes, I feel like they need their own stream, but you could already see from that it's a little bit different. Well, it's quite a bit different. It's having musical numbers with a somewhat camp Bilbo, and that's not the half of it. That's not the half of it. So yeah, that kind of brings me to the end of my kind of treatment of the adaptations. Before I kind of give a concluding remark on them and engage with the comments, I want to share something that's just come up. So you may have seen a few months ago that the Corncrakes produced the L&A catalogue, the Literature and Art catalogue, which highlighted the artworks and writings of several members within our online community and sphere. Guys who are doing great work, visual art, including fabrics. We had lots of different kinds of writing, from novels to poetry and so on. You can get access to a catalogue with all of these in, which is really a lovely piece. It actually, when you look at some of the pages, they are like a work of art, for the price of £5 plus shipping. And this is available exclusively from wilfings.com. Wilfings.com. Go there. There's only a limited number left, so this is your chance to get one if you've not already. I'd also recommend Wilfings more generally. They have a lot of good books on there. Go and check them out. So yeah, while I make a kind of final comment on these films, feel free, guys, to put in any of your opinions about the films that we've seen or talked about. What did you think of Bakshi's work? And any positives, any negatives? Go for it. I think, to me, what these films highlight is just how difficult it is to adapt The Lord of the Rings successfully, to tell the full story in a way which is faithful to Tolkien whilst making difficult decisions like cutting Tom Bombadil. The Soviet versions have Bombadil in. Bakshi's cut him. Runtime is an issue. If you've got a TV series, you can make like I keep saying Russian, Soviet Fellowship of the Ring plus a 2-part, then it's more possible. Budget's a factor. So some of these look a bit lame at points. But if you're working with a limited shoestring budget, it's not going to look like Jackson's work, which had millions of dollars poured into it. I would say as well that Jackson had the benefit of 40 years worth of people doing adaptations and drawings of Tolkien's work, right? There was a bank of material he could draw from. Whereas some of these guys, they're doing it for the first time. Bakshi is doing the Fellowship of the Ring for the first time as a film. It's a hard challenge, and he's doing that in a context where there is a revived interest in fantasy. And Tolkien, although he's certainly a major player, the form of Tolkien does not dominate yet. Conan the Barbarian is also an influence here. Later figures are going to, the artwork of Frank Frazetta, for example, is a major influence in this period. And I think someone like Aragorn looks like he could be a Frank Frazetta drawing. That's quite interesting. Whereas by the time we get to Jackson's work, that kind of influence is largely gone. And we're into the more John Howe, Alan Lee, very kind of ethereal, mystical, finely drawn art. It's not comic book art. It's not pulp magazine art. It's of a different kind of genre. That's where we're going with this. Whereas to me, Bakshi's work is much more in that tradition. I think it highlights how difficult it is. It highlights the openness for actually interpreting Tolkien and other works, and how a history of interpretation affects our engagement with it, and how we understand and conceptualize the characters and the narrative. And that actually, if we can kind of distance ourselves from Jackson, if that's possible, certainly from my age group, it's quite difficult growing up with those films. But if it's possible to do that, we can then think more imaginatively about the Lord of the Rings and other works that may have similar dynamics. It then allows for more creative possibilities for our own work, because if I'm imagining the orcs much more like Bakshi, well, then maybe my villains are will be influenced by that. The monsters will be influenced by that, and although they won't be a direct copy, they might have something of that more menacing feel that I get from Jackson's interpretation of the orcs. At the same time, I'm also struck by how this works in terms of book to film. But if we think of film to book, it's a totally different dynamic. Take something like Star Wars, 1977, A New Hope. It wouldn't have been known as that then, but that's the episode as it is now of Star Wars. That's the first time these characters have been introduced to anything. It's the first conceptualization. Obi-Wan Kenobi, his form is defined by Alec Guinness. Luke Skywalker's form is defined by Mark Hamill, and so on. We can't think of these characters as separate from these likenesses, because their first kind of introduction to the world is through the medium of film, where these physiognomies, these clothings, etc., have been almost set in stone through their visual presentation. Whereas a book can describe it, but you've still got to do the work and visualize it in your head. Or if the description is loose enough, it can be taken in different ways. So I think that that's a new dynamic. And certainly then, if my first engagement with the Lord of the Rings was through film, then that's fixed for me the vision of Aragorn that I have when I read the book, in a way that if I'd read the book first, I would have my own. And it creates a challenge then for the author or the creator, the creative, who's trying to develop their own stories or own visual style. That, okay, we're always influenced by things, by other sources of work, but there is a danger of getting fixed or boxed in by these other renditions of stories, and thus less able to kind of write our own in a different way or with a slightly different style or of presentation. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a place for certain fixed forms. As I was mentioning earlier, if you change fundamental aspects of a character like their physiognomy, it's going to have an impact on the way we feel about them and their congruency with the actions they perform. If you change the ethnicity of a character, it actually makes a difference to how we engage with it, how we feel about them, in terms of the kind of cultural legacy that ethnicity tends to have. So I think it's a challenge. So to my mind, this is actually a bit of a kind of call to explore other adaptations. If you're creative, don't just watch the main ones, but try and look at other adaptations. Use it as a way to open your mind to the creative possibilities in those stories and how they can be presented. I would also encourage focusing on reading for source material rather than visual art. Paintings aren't as bad, but the film, the movie, very much identifies form and character in the mind, and it's hard to dislodge. So if it's possible to read something rather than to see it, it's a much better starting point for us. At least as a starting point. Maybe you want to watch it later, but it's a better way to be informed by these works because it allows you to rethink about them. I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. Thank you for watching so far. And let's see. So we have Oswolf. You have been engaging quite a lot, and you seem to know Bakshi's film quite well, which is cool to see. As does Mr. Spoon. You were scared by scenes as a child, which is good. I thought this film would be scary as a child, and so the fact that you found it quite intimidating shows that, at least with that ring wraith scene, it really worked. Yes, exactly. When we see that scene, Jackson borrowed from it for sure. And there's other elements too, which I'm pretty convinced that Jackson was borrowing. Particularly, for example, the prologue. Bakshi's version has a prologue outlining the War of the Ring. Erroneously, he gets things wrong, but they outline the kind of history of the ring up until the present day. Jackson's does the same too, and so this isn't in the book like that. So this is a choice that they've made. Contrast that to the Soviet version, and that goes straight into talking about hobbits. So very different. Yeah, the choppy style is a massive problem for why it doesn't really work. And I think I feel like if he had just had someone overseeing it above him with real directing talent, this film might have been something amazing, something incredible, especially with its art style. But it's really issues of characterization and this coherency and pacing. You fix some of these problems, you have a great film, and it's there to be done. Well, I would just say on this that it's clear in when Frodo and Sam are kind of press ganged into the army by accident on its way to the Black Gate. The orcs aren't super keen on fighting, and there is a lot of dissent. We get hints of dissent against the plans of the Great Eye, that things aren't going totally well. So there is this strain in the orcs that they are disloyal, and if they can avoid fighting, they probably would in this case. They're not courageous by any means. So, but it maybe goes too far in that song. And yes, like the Rings of Power, we start to have to sympathize with the orcs, which is utterly ridiculous when they're monsters. They're not supposed to be sympathized with. They're supposed to be manifestations of hateful evil. It would be interesting to look at how Russia views Western artworks. I mean, that's a huge topic in itself, but maybe the Soviet Lord of the Rings might be a little way to approach that question, at least in a fun way. Maybe not their best treatment of it, but it would be interesting. And remember, it's Soviet, it's not just Russia at this point. So that's also an added dimension, which for me is quite difficult to get my head into, because the only things I see really from Soviet times or of Soviet life are presentations in modern Western art or cinema and film and TV series. I don't really know what it was like to be in Soviet Union. It's quite hard to say beyond Solzhenitsyn and so on, what he had to say about it. And of course, it changed over the decades. So yeah, it would be interesting to read up on that. I'll give you guys another minute or two just to see if you have any more questions or comments or anything you want to add before we go. I thoroughly enjoyed this stream. It's a little bit different, but it's good to think about these things and engage with the Lord of the Rings in a way which I certainly don't think about. When I think of as I keep slipping into, when I say the films, I mean the Jackson films. It's very easy to see them as the definitive work, whereas actually, no, there are other artworks out there. Maybe I was about to say, people talk about the stories in the Iliad where definitely pre-existed Homer, and he's just worked together lots of these legends and myths into one masterwork. Is Jackson's film adaptations the modern man's equivalent in terms of Lord of the Rings adaptations? Maybe. It's certainly wouldn't want to put them on the level of Homer, but they are. It's hard to kind of go around them, and I found this useful for thinking beyond what the Lord of the Rings could be, and what my own creative writing can be. That it shouldn't be boxed in the way that it has been. I don't see any more questions, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave us to go out on the very thing we started with, because I just enjoyed it so much, and I feel it's worthwhile to listen to again. It was good fun, and just a nice way to finish up. Thank you again for watching. Please go to thecorncrakemag.com. It's a really great magazine, and we want to be supporting people who are doing good stuff within our sphere, supporting our culture, keeping it going, enhancing it, growing it, giving it new life, providing a soil which artists can plant their creative seeds into. Go across there now, and I will see you soon. God bless you all. Bye for now.
In the middle of the earth, in the land of Shire, lives a brave little hobbit whom we all admire. With his long wooden pipe, fuzzy woolly toes, he lives in a hobbit hole and everybody knows him. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, he's only 3 feet tall. Bilbo Baggins, the bravest little hobbit of them all. Hobbits are peace-loving folks, They're never in a hurry and they take things slow. They don't like to travel away from home. They just like to eat and be left alone. But one day Bilbo was asked to go on a big adventure to the caves below, to help some dwarves get back their gold that was stolen by a dragon in the days of old. Bilbo Baggins, only 3 feet tall. Bilbo Baggins, bravest little hobbit of them all. Well, he fought with the goblins. He battled a troll. He riddled with Gollum. A magic ring he stole. He was chased by wolves, lost in the forest, escaped in a barrel from the Elf King's halls. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, the bravest little hobbit of them all. Now he's back in his home in the land of Shire, that brave little hobbit whom we all admire, just sitting on a treasure of silver and gold, puffing on his pipe in his hobbit hole. Bilbo, Bilbo Baggins, he's only 3 feet tall.